In July of 1952, during the administration of Harry Truman, Washington, D.C. appeared to be the target of airborne intruders. But the prowlers weren't Soviet fighter planes. They seemed to be UFOs.
Perhaps the most important sighting of all time was the so-called Washington merry-go-round.
On 2 weekends in 1952, July 19 and 20, and July 26 and 27, UFOs were tracked by radar and seen by numerous individuals over Washington, D.C. and its environs. People at Andrews Air Force Base and at Washington National Airport went outside and could actually see objects in the sky that matched positions of blips on the radar scopes, and the net result of it was, for a couple of days there, UFOs seemed to have had their way over the skies of Washington.
On the third day of the sightings, as operators tracked the mysterious signals, curiosity suddenly turned to panic. The objects were heading toward the prohibited airspace over the Capitol and the White House itself. The Pentagon ordered jets from an airbase in Delaware to intercept the intruders. Al Chop was the Air Force's civilian spokesman on UFO issues. He was called to the radar room at Washington National as the dramatic incident unfolded.
We were observing about 4 or 5 known flights and about 12 to 14 UFOs. And we saw the flight coming in from Delaware. We could see them on the radar scope, and the moment they came on the scope, all the UFOs disappeared.
The fighter planes patrolled the empty skies for some 20 minutes, but there was nothing to intercept. However, when the jets returned to base, the UFOs promptly reappeared on radar.
And then when they came back, after the interceptors left, the fact that they immediately came back on the scope, I was very apprehensive.
Again, jets were sent aloft. One pilot reported seeing the UFOs, which he described as blue and white lights. Then he reported that they were closing in.
We could also see them on the radar scope, and we could see his return and the unknowns grouping around him. And he said, "They're all around me." And then he said later on, "What shall I do?" Well, what could we tell him?
After a few minutes, the UFOs pulled back and then disappeared. The standoff was over. However, the extended episode had stunned the nation.
That sighting has never been adequately explained. Because it happened in Washington, D.C., it alerted everybody right on up to the President of the United States and caused a national press conference by the Chief of Intelligence of the Air Force to try to calm everybody down.
We have received and analyzed between 1 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. Of this great mass of reports, we have, as of date, come to only one firm conclusion, and that is that it does not contain any pattern of purpose or of consistency that we can relate to any conceivable threat to the United States.
General Sanford went on to explain that the sightings were merely an atmospheric anomaly, an inversion layer. Radar signals had bounced off this layer and picked up ground images of cars and buildings. Somehow, experienced radar operators at 3 different locations had misidentified them as UFOs. The press dutifully took down the story.
They bought the explanations. It was still standard practice, and it was for many years, to accept whatever the government said about flying saucers, no matter how foolish it was when you looked at it carefully.
The people at Washington National Airport and at Andrews were expert radar people and personnel. They'd been there for many, many years and could easily differentiate between ground clutter and true metallic objects. I mean, if they couldn't, they shouldn't have been radar operators.
The senior radar air traffic controller at Washington National Airport, Harry Barnes, wrote his own account of the so-called Washington merry-go-round.
He describes the objects as making right-angle turns, as hovering, as reversing their course and moving back upon their path. One radar tracked the objects as moving at approximately 7,000 miles per hour. He had never seen objects maneuver like this in his years of being over a radar scope. He didn't know what they were.
There were a few others who did not believe the objects were simply a product of unusual weather conditions.
At that time, I was convinced that these things were interplanetary machines of some kind, mainly because of what happened that night in the radar room at Washington National Airport. I'm convinced that those objects were real. We don't know what they are, and we don't know where they come from, but they are there.
Of course, it's entirely possible that the military didn't really believe its own explanation of the UFOs.
No fighters could catch up with these things, and they outmaneuvered the best that the military had to throw at them. Obviously, the people who were in charge of Air Force projects and Air Force intelligence at this time were not idiots. They were very, very smart people, as they are today. And I think they probably thought, once they appeared on Washington, oh my God, this is the holiest of holies. Now they're hovering around the White House and the Capitol. What can we do? Well, the answer turned out to be that they could do absolutely nothing. But it probably had to provoke a whole lot of consternation in official quarters. I can't believe that they wouldn't have been interested in, at some level, trying to find out what is going on.
It's a national defense concern. There was a technical report that said it's the most classified subject in the United States, even more so than the H-bomb. That's going pretty far. That's taking it very seriously.